Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to a virtual meeting of Heritage Oakville. Thank you for all making the time to be here this morning after a long weekend, and a pretty wild weekend it was too. We've got an agenda, a good agenda today. We've got 4 items to discuss, and we have a number of delegations. And as usual, the delegations were required to register before the meeting. And as usual, again, because there was a holiday Monday, arrangements were made to make sure that they were properly registered. IT staff will be controlling the movements in and out, and we thank them again for their help in doing all of this. Agenda materials are available at oakville.ca for any member of the public who's watching the meeting today and they want to have all the materials in front of them. As usual, the committee members will be muted during the course of the meeting. And when it's your turn to speak, I will try to notice that you want to speak, and I will keep a speakers list going, and people will move in and move out as the meeting proceeds. I can hear a lot of background somewhere, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. We're having trouble with Bob Ferguson, getting him logged in with sound and picture. I can see him, but I can't hear him yet, and you're muted, Bob. Are you able to unmute? Nope. Anyway, we'll keep going. Lots and lots of background noise today. Yes?
Drew, I think that's because he's logged on to 2 computers.
It could be.
He's got his tablet and his computer, and you get that background.
It could be. So I can see he's moved location within the house. He's moved from one room to another. Anyway, we'll hope that all of that settles down during the course of the meeting. So I will remind everyone that we are an advisory committee, and that recommendations that we make go to the Planning and Development Council meeting at its meeting on Tuesday, the 7th of June at 6:30. And anyone who wishes to delegate to speak to that meeting should do so by noon the previous day. So council disposes, we merely propose. So, Madam Secretary, do we have any regrets for the meeting today? Doesn't look like it. Oh, Jerry's not here, but she's a bit under the weather. And I don't know if she had updated you, Jill.
Mr. Chairman, I just had the email that Jerry was possible regrets.
Yeah, she's a bit under the weather, so we're hoping that she'll be okay, and maybe she'll be able to join us later. Okay, so are there any declarations of pecuniary interest with respect to any of the matters before the committee today? Seeing none. Next item is the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. These minutes were circulated. Does anyone have any comment on these minutes? Would anyone like to give me a motion to approve these minutes? Thank you, Councillor Deddock. So we have a motion to approve the minutes as circulated. Any further discussion? Anyone opposed to that motion? The motion is carried. Thank you. So the first discussion item is item 4.1, a heritage permit application with respect to 43 Trafalgar Road. And I think it's Carolyn who's up on all of the things today, all of the items today. So Carolyn, off you go, take us through this application.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. So our first application today is for 43 Trafalgar Road. This is the house here. Go to the next slide. Just location map shows it's on the northeast corner of Trafalgar Road and King Street in the Old Oakville Heritage Conservation District. Next slide, please. So again, it's designated as part of the Old Oakville district, and it contains a 1921 two-story brick house with a detached frame garage. And the application before you today includes sort of 2 portions. One is alterations to the existing house, and that includes a number of items, changes to the existing roofing, a restoration of the cladding, changes to the front porch, and one of the chimneys, and some windows and doors. And I'll go through those in more detail in the presentation. And the second portion is a new addition to the existing garage. Next, please. So here's a view of the house from the corner, from the southwest. And as you can see, it's a beautiful arts and crafts house, retains a lot of its original features. One of the goals in the house is to restore a lot of these features. So as you can see here, the front porch at one time was like enclosed with screens. So The current proposal is to remove those screens. Of course, in the future, they could be able to keep screens on and off if they wanted to, but the idea at this point is just to open it up to restore that original porch that you can see. Another piece of the restoration for the house is replacing the asphalt shingles with cedar shingles, so a natural cedar shingles on the roof. And another portion of this restoration is to restore the wood shingle cladding. So a lot of these shingles have been replaced over time, a lot of them have deteriorated, and they're looking at restoring them and replacing them with new wood shingles to match. And another piece of this is the restoration of, or the retention of a lot of the windows, historic windows, and some new windows which have already been replaced, and to replace a number of windows that were actually approved through a heritage permit in 2014, but the previous owners never undertook the work. So a lot of this application is a continuation of the 2014 heritage permit. Next slide, please. So again, this is a view of the house from the south, from the street, and you can see a lot of the original features are still there and are going to continue to be maintained. So these two views, the house will not be changing too much. Next slide, please. This view is just here to show the chimney. They are proposing to remove the chimney that you can see there and replace that portion with a roof line, a gable roof to match the rest of the house. As you can see, there have been some changes in that area with a new window and flat roof put in at one period of time. So the idea would be to remove the chimney from the second story and to replace that wall with cedar shingle cladding and to restore the roof line as well. Next slide, please. And here's a view of the detached garage, which is a historic frame garage. This garage is to be maintained, but the new addition would be set to the rear of the garage, attaching it to the house. Next, please. And a view of the house from the east. This portion of the house will be partially covered by the new addition, the mudroom addition that attaches the garage to the house. So you can see the door and the windows on the first story will either be covered up or removed as part of that attachment to the garage. Next slide, please. And then here is the north elevation facing the rear of the property. There have been a number of changes to this wall over the years, as you can see, little additions made in the roof, changes to some of the, a replacement of some of the shingle cladding, and replacement of some windows and moving of windows and addition of doors to the bottom. So again, on this elevation, the owners are proposing to essentially continue what was approved in 2014 through the heritage permit for replacement of some windows and doors, but that was never undertaken by the previous owners. And again, the left-hand side where the garage is, the little shed portion that was added to the back of the original garage, that would be removed as part of the addition. The addition will be placed in that location instead. Next slide, please. I'll take you through the drawing. So here's just a footprint of the house. In the regular gray, that's the existing house and garage. The hatched gray that you can see behind the garage is the proposed new mudroom addition. And then the yellow portion is an overhang. It's a covered porch area that would be part of the garage addition, but it wouldn't actually be usable space. It would be an open space for the owners to enjoy in the backyard. Next slide, please. And here's a roof plan showing how that garage and the rear covered porch area would be integrated together and attached to the house. Next slide. On the front elevation, you can see here in red, they're proposed showing the screens to be removed. One other piece here, which wasn't mentioned earlier in the photos, they are proposing to replace the existing shingles on the roof of the bay window with a copper roof, just to help with getting rid of some of the water there, because it is a low slope roof. So the metal roof will be easier in terms of maintenance and making sure that the water isn't damaging any of the wood shingles below. Next slide, please. Again, from looking at the south elevation, removal of those, the screens that were installed, as well as some wood paneling that was installed at one point. And you can see here in more details, a couple of the windows in the top are to be replaced as per the 2014 heritage permit, and the removal of the chimney as we discussed. And you can just see the entry door to the left of the garage there. So that would be the mudroom, or the new door for accessing the mudroom, which is set back from the garage. It looks like it's in the same plane as the garage doors, but it's actually set back towards just behind the existing house. Next slide, please. And going to the rear elevation, again, a lot of the windows being replaced as previously approved. One of the changes from the previous approval is to widen the doors a little bit more on the main floor. So you can see the existing doors, which of course were not original, would be replaced with new larger doors. And the right would be a set of French doors, and the left would be larger sliding doors. And above the left sliding doors, they are proposing to change the windows a little bit so that they match up and line up with these new doors, as opposed to the single window that's there. They'd be proposing to install 2 sets of windows to line up with those doors. On the left-hand side, you can see the rear portion of the addition going onto the garage. And it's difficult to see, but you can see the angle of the shadow on that portion. That's showing the angle of that covered porch area that extends beyond behind the attachment, the addition to the garage. Next slide, please. And then this is, of course, where the addition is being proposed. So as you can see, the existing door and window and bay window, those will be removed just because the new addition will be attached there. It will now be an interior space. And then above, you can see one of the red windows. They're proposing to extend it to make it larger. It's currently a shorter window and doesn't line up with the rest of them. So they'll be proposing to match it in terms of the proportions and size with the existing windows. And again, the removal of the chimney replaced with wood shingles and a new gable roof line at the top. And on the bottom, again, you can see the new addition of the garage on the right-hand side and the extension of the covered porch area. Next slide, please. And this is just a simple sketch that was included as part of the application. And the next slide provides some more details. So again, a lot of these significant architectural elements are to be restored, going back to the cedar shingle cladding, shingle roofing, and of course, restoring the shingle cladding on the house, restoring the front porch. The changes to the house are all really on the rear elevations and are mostly consistent with the heritage permit from 2014. The garage addition is quite small, it's subtle, it's set back from the existing garage and not very visible from the street. And all the new materials match the existing house or the garage, and no minor variances are required for the subject application. Next slide, please. So this is the heritage permit recommendation you have before you. So staff are recommending that it be approved, subject to final details on the windows, doors, and cladding being submitted to heritage planning staff for final approval before construction. And I believe we have the owner and possibly the agent as well here, but I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you, Carolyn. And as you did note, some of this is a continuation of an earlier application that we had approved. I mean, this is different, but there were some elements already included in that. So that's
Correct.
good. Okay, good. So any questions of Carolyn? Nope, I'm not missing anybody. I know I don't see anybody. Okay, good. Now, anybody from the applicant wish to speak? Mark, you're logged on. Did you want to say anything, or is your architect with you?
The architect has joined. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything to add, just appreciate your time today and the support from the town staff.
Super, thank you. So any questions of the applicant or the architect with respect to this application? Nope, I don't see any. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. So we're now confined to the board. Any discussion or comments on the application that we have before us? That's good. Does that mean everybody's happy with it? Would somebody like to give me, thank you, George. I presume that's a motion to accept the staff recommendation. Okay, so the motion's on the floor to accept the staff recommendation that the application be approved. Is there any further discussion on that? Is there anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, the application is approved. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, the next item is item 4.2, which is a heritage permit application with respect to 207 Allen Street. And I think that's you again, Carolyn. So
Yes.
off you go. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, this property is located at 207 Allen Street. It's located within the Trafalgar Road district. Go to the next slide, please. Let's show the location map. So the northeast corner of Allen and Palmer that you can see here. Next slide, please. So again, designated as part of the Trafalgar Road district, it contains a 1927 two-story stucco house with arts and crafts influences. The current application is to demolish the existing rear one-story wing, which was constructed in the 1990s, and to instead construct a new two-story addition with a one-story portion as well. Next slide, please. This is just showing the house here along Allen Street. You can see there are other sort of arts and crafts era homes that were built around the same time as this house. Next slide, please. Just showing the house from the corner. The existing house is to essentially stay the same, except for one change. As you can see here on the south elevation, above the side door, there is a window that is a little bit lower than the rest of the upper story windows, and they are proposing to raise this window. With the staircase being there, some changes inside will have the railing too high that is covering the window. And so they are proposing to actually move this window up so that it matches the second story windows in the rest of the house. But that's the only proposal for the existing house. Otherwise, it's to remain as you see it. Next slide, please. This is just a view into the backyard from Palmer Avenue. You can see the one-story 90s addition there that's to be removed. They are proposing to do a new two-story and one-story addition that would set back into the rear yard in a similar fashion as the greenhouse you can see to the north. So the idea would be to line up the new addition with a similar setback to that addition there. Next slide, please. And again, just a view from the back showing those two houses next to each other. Next slide, please. So here's a site plan. On the right-hand side, it's just a zoomed in version. You can see the existing one-story wing is there shown on the top portion with a bit of red hatching. So that's to be removed. And instead there would be the darker gray portion, which is a two-story portion to be constructed, and a smaller light gray section, which would be to the south. So those are the two portions that would be added. And just while we take note of this, we'll be going through some minor variances that have been approved for the site. And one of them is the setback, the side yard setback. So you can see the existing house is actually quite close to the side yard, and so to the flankage side yard. So it's actually, I believe, 0.58 meters. And I'll get into this in more detail, but just for context, showing that the existing house does not meet the setback requirements from Palmer Avenue, but the existing addition also does not meet that, and the proposed addition is going to keep a similar setback to what you see today. Next slide, please. So this is a view from the house, from the front rather, from Allen Street. So again, the existing house is to remain. You can see the rear addition just to the side slightly at the back there. They're proposing wood cladding, so horizontal wood cladding, so that's a bit different from the stucco in the existing house, but still something that matches. You can also see a brick chimney, which would be at the back of that new addition. Of course, it wouldn't really be as visible from the street as you see it here. It's more visible, obviously, just in this flat drawing. But for the most part, the new addition will be quite hidden behind the existing house. Next slide, please. This is a rear view. So again, there's the brick chimney. This is the new addition with wood siding. And you can also see to the left-hand side, the one-story wing, which is a bit of a sunroom wing. It's not a real balcony. The railings at the top are just for a decorative element. So it's really just the use of that one-story piece inside with, you see a lot of, again, glazing, multi-paned windows. The same idea is proposed on the two-story portion to have multi-paned wood windows, similar to the existing house, but a bit different, to provide that differentiation between the old and the new. Next slide, please. This is showing it from Palmer Avenue. Again, you can see the new addition has a lower roof line than the existing house. The existing house is not very tall, so the way they've dealt with it on the new addition is they've lowered the roof line in keeping with the guidelines for the district, but they've raised the eave in order to get a little bit more height in there. So again, you can see the one-story sunroom addition from here, and you can also see in the existing house where they're proposing to move that window up slightly. And again, the existing window is a wood window, but it's not historic. So there's no historic material being removed there. They're just going to be taking what's existing and moving it up slightly. Next slide, please. And this is the view from the north, which of course won't really be that easily visible. But again, you see wood cladding, wood trim, wood multi-paned windows. Next slide. So there were a few minor variances that had been approved. Again, the one that I was pointing out with the site plan is the flankage yard setback. So they have an approval of 0.89 meters for the new addition. The bylaw requires a minimum of 3.5, but again, 0.89 is similar to what's there currently, and the existing house is actually only 0.58 meters. So there were no concerns with that, that minor variance. The next two are related to the floor area ratio and the lot coverage. So they did get approval for 64.92% floor area ratio. The max in the bylaw is 43%. The lot coverage they were approved is 36.11, whereas the max is 19%. The existing is 31, so it's already quite over. This is a very unique situation. Obviously, those numbers look quite high, but the goal of those two zoning bylaw requirements is to ensure that any houses or additions to houses maintain the massing and scale of the neighborhood, and secondly, maintain the separation distances of nearby homes. This is a unique property where the lot itself is quite small, but what they're proposing is quite similar to the existing houses around. And of course, as you saw, the new addition does not go past the rear wing of the existing house to the north. The house to the east, which is, it's not a heritage building, but it has quite a large lot, and so there's lots of space still between this house and that house to the east. So the Committee of Adjustment and Planning staff were supportive of these minor variances because in reality, on paper, they might look like big numbers, but in reality, the goal of the zoning bylaw is achieved, which is to maintain the massing and scale of the neighborhood and the separation distances between the homes. And so from a heritage planning perspective, we also consider the changes to meet the requirements of the district plan and that it retains the character of the district. So in terms of details for the home, the design is quite traditional, but it's compatible with the existing heritage house, but it's also distinguishable from the heritage house. It's different materials. The windows are a little bit different, just so we know, what's historic and what was added on. Again, the additions are lower than the roof line of the existing house. They're set back from the streets. So the heritage house still remains the most prominent portion of the building. And traditional materials proposed, brick chimney, wood cladding, multi-pane wood windows. And the other piece of it, which I should have maybe described more clearly in the site plan slide, there are two mature trees that need to be maintained, one towards the back of the property and one along Palmer Avenue. And so a lot of the design work that went into these additions was to make sure that these mature trees would not be impacted. And they've been able to do that and achieve that. Next slide, please. So here we have the staff recommendation. So staff are recommending approval of the application. And again, similar to the last one, subject to the following, that final details on the windows, doors, wood cladding, and brick material be submitted to Heritage Planning staff for final approval. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I believe we have the agent for the application here as well.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. I hope these mature trees are still there. We lost a couple of pretty mature trees around here with that storm going through on Saturday. So any questions of Carolyn about the application? Okay, Emily, are you wanting to add anything to what Carolyn had to say? Good morning.
First of all, just good morning to you, Mr. Chair, and everyone, the members of the committee. Nothing to add really, but just to say that I appreciate your time today and that Carolyn has made a very informative speech. So I can't think of anything else to add at this point.
Well, we'll see if there are any questions for you. Does anyone have any questions for Emily about this? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're now confined to the board. So we've got the application. Any comments or discussion on the application as it's presented? No, Councillor Gittings.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, question for staff. So the variances have already gone through the COA and have been approved, correct?
Correct.
And they're similar to other lots of the same size in the area?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, could you repeat that? I just didn't quite hear it.
Oh, sorry. Let me. There we go. And those are in line or similar to variances on similar sized lots in the area?
Yes, correct. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Giddings, there are a few lots in here that are a bit unique. They're a bit smaller, and similar types of approvals have been given out for properties with additions. It's just across the street to the south, for example. They are unique ones, so of course the Committee of Adjustment considers that in their approval of these. So there were similar types of variances that have been approved in this neighborhood. Yes.
All right. Thank you. And Chair, I'll move the staff recommendation at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much. I can take that recommendation now. So we have a motion. Are there any further questions or discussions around that motion? Okay, I'll call the question. The motion is that we accept the staff recommendation. Are there any opposed to that motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Thank you very much, everybody. So we're now on to 4.3, which is a heritage permit application with respect to 312 King Street. Carolyn, that's you again. Off you go. Thanks,
Yes.
Emily.
Okay. Thank you. So we are now back to the Old Oakville District. We'll go to the next slide, please. So 312 King Street is located south of King Street. And now, of course, I'm forgetting which street. Dunn. Nope. Reynolds. Sorry. Thank you. So the southwest corner is located, it's one of the original lots, as you can see, one of the quite larger lots in the area. Go to the next slide, please. So again, designated as part of the Old Oakville District. The property is unique. It contains a late 19th century brick home, which is difficult to see because it's been covered in aluminum cladding for many years. There were other additions on the southwest corner around 1910 to 1913 is a stucco portion that was added. And then on the southeast, we have a one-story 1950s addition and 1960s addition. And the 1950s and 60s portion is what we're talking about in terms of a replacement with a one new wing. So that's the first point I have here is the replacement of the existing rear one-story wing. It should be wings, really. It's 1950s and 60s. But they would be replaced with one new wing. And the second portion is to alter the fenestration on the rear elevation of this two-story house. This would actually be the early 20th century portion that's affected. And on this same portion, they're proposing to construct a new basement walkout on the west elevation, as well as to alter the section of roof on this portion of the house. So we'll take you through that in the photos and drawings. Next slide, please. So here's a view of the house from the front. The owners are going to be looking into restoring the house, but at this point, they're not entirely sure what's under all of the cladding. As you can see, there's angel stone, there is a lot of aluminum cladding, and of course, we know from fire insurance plans that the house is brick underneath. So the idea is at some point they're going to be coming back with a heritage permit for restoration of the rest of the house, but today they're focusing on these alterations to the rear and to the replacement of that one-story portion of the house. So depending on what they find and investigate in terms of the structural issues or anything they might find or the condition of the materials, they will come back and decide sort of how to restore the rest of the house. So this view that you see here today is not going to change, but in the future they would like to do some restoration work on it. The only thing that would be visible from this view would be the basement walkout, which wouldn't be that visible. On the right-hand side of this photo, you can see a small shrubs. This is the basement walkout is set back behind that piece there. We'll go to the next slide, please. This is a view now down, along Reynolds Street, going down towards the water. The garage is to remain, and you can see the one-story portions on the southeast of the house. That's to be replaced with a new wing. Next slide, please. And again, this is just a closer up view of those one-story portions. Next, please. This is a view from the southwest corner of the property. The southwest two-story portion, which contains that chimney, when it was built, they didn't do a full hip roof to match the rest of the roof. The owners are proposing to take this very low slope roof and actually build up and replace it with a hip roof that would tie into the rest of the house. And from this view, you can also see the upper story bay window that's proposed to be replaced. And the around the chimney is where the basement walkout is proposed. Just around the chimney, the door and window would be on either side of the chimney below grade. Next slide, please. This is a closer view of that one-story portion, which is to be removed and replaced with a new one. And you can also see a set of windows on the bottom there, a triple set of windows to be replaced with new doors. Next slide, please. So here's the site plan showing these changes. Again, there's a lot of other changes shown on here, which we're not looking at today in terms of, the new pool, et cetera. Again, the applicants will come back with a later heritage permit to deal with some of these landscaping elements and any restoration work they're going to do on the house. But on the right-hand side, you can see the darker gray portion on the bottom right-hand corner. This is the new wing to replace the existing one. The existing wings, they're not in the same level as the house. One portion is, one isn't. So it's a little bit tricky inside. So, and there are also some structural issues with that foundation. So this will clean everything up into one level that would be consistent with the rest of the house. The one change in terms of footprint that you'll see is there is a hatched area, rectangle there. That would be filled in. So that's an additional bit of space, which also results in the increase in a residential floor area ratio as well as lot coverage, which I'll get to as well. But that is, for the most part, the main change that you're going to be seeing on the house is that new addition. Next slide, please. This is just a floor plan just of the basement, just to show on the left-hand side, you can see a set of stairs there. Those are external, and you can see one glass door and one glass window. Those are on either side of that existing chimney that I had shown in the photo. Next slide, please. This is again looking from the east. This is the new addition they're proposing, a board and batten. Again, it's all in line with the floor level of the existing house. There is a change in the roof line. The existing one has a shed roof on the right-hand side and a gable roof on the left-hand. They're proposing to have one simple hip roof that brings all of those two portions together into one new addition. So again, multi-paned windows, wood, board and batten, a traditional look from the street. Next slide, please. And then this is coming back on the opposite side, looking from the west, and you can see that's that new addition on the right-hand side. Larger glass sections, less traditional, but more contemporary on the interior. So that'll be facing interior towards the backyard. And then, of course, in the middle portion of the house, this is where you can see the basement walkout with a new door and a new glass window with stairs going down. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I should stay there. Sorry, if you can go back one. Thank you. Just showing the roof there at the top of that portion, which is now a hip roof that would connect in with the existing roof that you see. Next slide. And again, here you can see that hip roof as well. You can barely sort of see there that very low sloped line of the existing roof. So this will really make the roof lines more cohesive and just have a better all look overall. So on the right-hand side, again, you can see the hip roofed one-story new addition. You can also see the French doors there just to the left of that addition, which replaced the set of windows. The rest of the one-story windows and other windows remain, except for the two-story bay window, which is being replaced with these French doors and a bit of a Juliet balcony and a box, sort of box window that sits out. And this will provide them with a view of the lake and just kind of cleans up that wall, which has been altered over time. I do believe the windows on the main floor that you see there and the other wood windows have already received a heritage grant for restoration work. Next slide, please. So again, this one has minor variances that were already approved. One is for the flankage setback of 1.07 meters. The bylaw requires 3.5 meters, but in this case, they're keeping what is exactly there today. So the footprint and the setback is essentially the same. So that setback is really an existing condition that's just going to be continued with the new addition. In terms of the floor area, the current house is 36.89. With that increase of that little rectangle on the footprint in the new addition, this bumps up to 37.47%. Again, a very minor change and not really visible from the street at all. And the same applies to the lot coverage. The existing is 25.2. That small section will bump it up to 25.69%. Again, very minimal and not visible really from the street. So from a heritage planning perspective, we had no concerns with those minor variances. And again, they have already been approved by the Committee of Adjustment. So the new addition, again, maintains the existing conditions of the site. It's going to be a better version of what's there now. And we'll fix some of those structural issues with the existing wings. The design and materials are sympathetic to the historic house. They're using traditional board and batten, wood windows. The new hip roof to the rear portion of the house is an improvement. And the basement rock out in a rear yard is not easily visible. It gives them more light and space and usability in the basement without really impacting the heritage character of the house or the district. And again, they will be coming back for future heritage permits for that landscaping work and restoration of the house as well. Next slide, please. So again, staff recommendation is that the application be approved, subject to final details in the windows, doors, and cladding material coming to staff for final approval. We do have a second condition here, and that is that materials such as any wood windows be removed, be made available for salvage. I should have noted in the 1950s and 60s wings, there are some wood windows. We're not entirely sure of the age of them. It was very common at that time, of course, that they could have been taken from another building that was taken down, or perhaps they were made by hand in the 1950s and 60s. It's more likely that they were salvaged. So we want to continue that and make them available again for salvage for another use if possible. So that's the staff recommendation. And again, I think we have Emily here who can answer questions for this application as well.
Super, thank you, Carolyn. So are there any questions of Carolyn? Okay, Emily, do you wish to add anything to what Carolyn has said? You're still on mute, Emily.
I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. Carolyn has answered, I think, or explained a lot of the, the gist of the proposal. So at this point, I have nothing to add.
Okay, does anyone have any questions of Emily? Okay, thank you, Emily. We're now confined to the board. Any discussion? Any comments, observations? Okay. Anyone wish to give me a motion to? Thank you, Bob. Gotcha. So we have a motion on the floor to accept the staff recommendation. Any further discussion? Anyone opposed to that motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Thank you very much, everybody. When you think about those, thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
When you think about these three applications, it seems, they've gone through sort of easily, but I think that's just a tribute to the process that we have. There's so much work involving members of the committee and the staff and the client and their architect that takes place prior to the application coming to us for formal approval and recommendation to council. That I think is a tribute to that process that we've covered off most of the important elements in the application. Right, so the next one is 4.4, which is a notice of intention to designate. We always love notices of intention to designate, and it's the former Palermo Methodist Church. So that's Carolyn again.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Chair. It's a good news story. We're hoping to have a few more of them, but we also had recently had the other property that Dave had taken through at 2487 Old Bronny Road. So this is a continuation of that process. We'll go to the next slide, please. As you can recall, with Palermo, this is showing the image of Palermo here, and this is the gray, obviously indicating this property. But council had directed staff to look at the remaining heritage properties in Palermo and really move forward with designation, of course, where it's warranted. So this is the next property that we've looked at, and we're happy to say we've got a recommendation for designation for this one. So next slide, please. So again, it's the former Palermo Methodist Church parsonage. But when we were able to really dig into this, we found a lot more information than we thought. And that's thanks in large part to Tom Murison's report that he had done. I did not include it in the agenda because it's very lengthy. We do have a copy. If anyone else, wants to read it at any point, we're happy to share it. But based on his report and his investigation in the house, he was able to find that the rear portion, of course, is older than the front portion, which is quite common, but it's quite early 1800s and early 19th century settlers cabin. And he was also able to discover that over time, either a new addition was put on the front or possibly another house was moved onto the front of that house. And both portions were renovated to end up in a Gothic revival style home that you see today. So there's lots of heritage value in this house and a really interesting history. So I've completed a research report that was attached, and of course a lot of the information in there was based on Tom Murison's report, which he was happy to supply. So in the end, we are recommending to designate the property under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And we'll go through the next slide and I'll give you a bit more details in the home. So in terms of the design physical value, when we evaluated the property, we believe it to be a rare remaining example of an early 19th century cabin that displays a high degree of craftsmanship in its original timber frame construction. And it also has heritage value as a representative example of a Gothic revival style house. It's always had a very unique character to it with the very steep roofs. Obviously, some changes have been made over time, but you can still see that Gothic revival house that remains today. In terms of historical and associative value, it's associated with the Palermo Methodist Church, now the United Church, which still remains active in the community. It's also associated with the development of Palermo and the surrounding area. Of course, Palermo was a very significant village for the surrounding area and within Trafalgar Township. And, churches are often at the heart of those communities when they were being developed. And so this church, of course, this building played a significant role within the church and within the community. And even looking just at the 19th century cabin, of course, you can see this is really significant in terms of the early development of Palermo and Trafalgar Township along Dundas Street. Contextually, it's physically, visually, and historically linked to its surroundings. The building supports and maintains the area's character as a settlement that developed and evolved in the 19th and 20th century. Again, even just understanding, that we had a one-story cabin that faced Dundas Street and the new portion added on to the front facing Old Brongy Road. That just shows a bit of the development of the village itself and how it changed from a very early 19th century rural settlement to a quite prosperous, thriving town within the township. Next slide, please. So again, this is all in your agenda, but just highlighting some of these pieces. We have again the bottom drawings by Tom Murison. The rear portion of the house, he believes, was a one-story settler's cabin with a low sloped roof. And you can see, of course, it was raised at one time, the roof was raised. And he was able to determine that just by getting inside the building and seeing that the materials had changed and the type of construction had changed. And he could see the different eras of the home within inside. So that's an extremely important portion of the house. Next slide, please. And of course, you can see as it developed over time, it was added to in the front, and then the roofs were all raised to get the very steep Gothic revival home that you see today. And it's very likely that this was done when the church took ownership of the property and when they turned it into a parsonage. Next slide, please. Just highlighting some of the elements. In terms of designation, we are not proposing to designate any of the interior elements. This is typical that we don't do this thing. It's very difficult to control in terms of alterations to the property. In this case, we feel like the most of the property physically that represents the heritage value is really in the exterior anyway. The windows included. So again, these windows you can see very significant, unique casement windows on the first floor, some 2/2 wood windows in the upper floor. Those are all elements that can be captured in the exterior anyway, so we would be including those in the designation. Next slide, please. And again, in terms of his historical value, just showing its history as a Gothic revival home. And, hopefully some of those elements could be restored back to what they were. We've got this fantastic photograph from around 1904, which shows the house as it was before the insel brick was added. and the porch was taken down. So the new owner, who is supportive of the designation, is aware of the grant program and is actually working with Tom Murison to try to see what can be done in the house for restoration, and what maybe they can apply for the 2023 grant program. Next slide, please. Again, this is just speaking to the history of the building as it relates to the village of Palermo. You can see the Palermo United Church here, so a very significant part of the village that remains, and of course we want to see protected. Next slide, please. Just a couple more photos, one on the left-hand side from the 1940s and one on the right from around 1990. Again, you can see the insula brick has been put on, and some of the other alterations have been done by that stage. Next slide. And here's the house from a couple of years ago. I'm just showing it. So again, still there, needs some love, but it really has a lot of the historic heritage elements remaining that contribute to its heritage value for designation. Next slide, please. So again, just to conclude, it's a significant built heritage resource that merits designation. The owner, again, is supportive of the designation. We worked with them right from the very beginning, from when they purchased it from the church who was selling it. And their understanding of the Palermo Village growth area, of course, there is potential future redevelopment on this site, which is also why it's important to protect it through designation. We know that there will be change as things move along in Palermo, but this helps us protect these resources. Just as we've done on the south side of Dundas Street, you can see a lot of the historic houses have been restored and maintained, but new development has also been approved as well. So a staff report on this designation will also be presented to Planning and Development Council on June 7th, and we'd be looking for their support to issue a notice of intention to designate. Next slide, please. So that's just the staff recommendation that a notice of intention to designate be issued for the property. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, the owner is not here, but she is supportive of the designation.
Super, thank you, Carolyn. I mean, there's a lot of good reading in here, but I, for one, wouldn't mind seeing Tom's report. I know you didn't want to print it all out, but maybe I'll remind you, I'll send you an email and ask for that.
Absolutely.
And anybody else that wants one, just send Carolyn an email, because I'm sure Tom will have gone into some detail about the different periods of construction and the types and methods. It's funny, when you listen to him, sometimes he can say, yes, I know who did that, because he's seen the same type of woodwork in another house nearby, and he knows who did it, and he said, oh, well, that guy did it here too, because he's used the same craftsmanship. So it's really fascinating to see that. Anyway, any questions of Carolyn about this? Yes, thank you. Kerry, off you go.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Carolyn. I was just curious. It looked to me with the few interior photos that currently the building is empty or appears to be empty. Do you know what the long-term intention the owner has for the property?
Yes, it's to live in it. So possibly rent it out, make it usable space for someone to rent and live in. But also they've actually said they would like to live in it. So as a family. So with children and everything. So obviously some work that needs to be done, but that is the goal at this point. And again, long-term, there is again potential for redevelopment within this area. But in the short term, that is the goal, is to have as a home.
Sweet, thank you.
That would be super. Any other questions? George?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, not really a question, more a comment, because I was part of the group, I guess it must have been 4 years ago at least, when we took a look at the house. And a couple of wardens from Palermo United were there, and we had some discussions with them. And it's interesting that we were trying to, I guess, gauge the interest that they might have had in the designation. The one leading warden, I guess, at the time of that morning didn't have much interest. And we questioned him a little bit more just to get his feeling for it. And he said, well, first of all, there's no sewage, there's no water connection. We don't have any fresh water, there's no sewage. So, you know, we don't want to have to go through all that construction and that if it's a designation. So, excuse me. So I found that interesting that staff persisted, I guess, in the new owner. So that's presumably something they'd have to do unless it's already been done. So it's not a question, it's just a comment of how we found the house, because Tom was there that day as well. I remember that. It really is a very, very unique house with different, the staircases and the railings and all the trim. It's really quite an amazing house. So this will be a great addition. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to George, just on that, I think George, Councillor Duddick, I think you were there as well in 2018. So that's when the church still owned it, and they were finding difficulty getting, they couldn't connect to the trunk for the sewage lines. It's a large trunk coming down Highway 25 there. But the current owners have been working with our staff to just replace the existing septic to fix it up and keep it going. So that is, I understand it right now, is the current goal. Again, if there is a large redevelopment in the future, say if someone purchases multiple lots here in this area and we're looking at a big condo building with the incorporation of the Heritage House, that'll be a whole other development that they'll obviously have to deal with, removing the septic and getting new sewage connected. But at this stage, they were able to, staff's been working with them to be able to just sort of revive the existing septic and keep that going for as long as they can. And I think all the other utilities are fine and are there. So it sounds like I think it's an easier fix than I think the church had thought it would be at the time.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn, because I remember that, George. I'd forgotten, but I remember there were some difficulties with tying up to services and things. Yeah, which was a shame because it seemed the house was being stranded. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, would somebody like to give me a motion to approve? Thank you, George. So the staff recommendation is that we recommend to council that they issue a notice under section 29 of part 4 of the Heritage Act. Any further discussion on that motion? Anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, number 5 is information items. I don't have any noted here on the agenda, so I presume, Madam Secretary, that there are none. The date and time of our next meeting is June the 28th. It's my birthday again, but it'll probably be a virtual meeting, so I will be unable to provide appropriate refreshments. But I'll maybe have them here on the desk. I can share them with you. Okay, well, thank you very much again, everybody, for the gift of your time today. And if I can have a motion to adjourn. Right, thank you, Brenda. So we have a motion to adjourn to which no one has opposed. So thank you very much again, everybody. See you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.